Hello, student. Good morning. How are you? I hope you are fine. Welcome to online class. Today we are going to study of different AC/DC voltage sources in the laboratory and note their specification. Aim of this experiment is to enlist different AC/DC voltage source in the laboratory and to note their specification. List of electronic equipment required for this experiment is DC regulated power supply 0 to 30 volt, dual power supply 0 to 30 volt, alternator, signal generator, batteries, DC generator, direct voltage source, electric cell, that is primary cell and secondary cell, function generator, etc. Theory regarding this experiment is source of electrical power. A source supplies power to a load. A source supply power to a load. The voltage source maintain the current in the circuit. There are two types of sources: AC sources and DC sources. DC sources, the flow of charge in just one direction and the fixed polarity. Example of DC sources: batteries, DC generators, regulated power supply, dual power supply. Batteries. A battery is a group of cells that generate electric energy from their internal chemical reactions. Cell. The cell consists of two different conducting material called the electrodes immersed in an electrolyte. Due to production of ions and free electrons, two electrodes have a difference of potential that provide voltage output from the cell. There are two types of cell: primary cell, secondary cell. First, primary cell. Primary cell cannot be recharged. The cell used in a torch or are of primary type. Example: voltage cell, Daniel cell, etc. Secondary cell. These cells can be recharged for many times. Example: lead acid cell. DC generator. A DC generator is similar to an alternator when its shaft is rotated at the specified speed by an external energy such as steam turbine or water turbine. A voltage of rated value can be produced. A DC generator gives higher voltage and power than a battery. Regulated power supply. A DC power supply which maintains the output voltage constant irrespective of AC mains fluctuation or load variation is known as regulated DC power supply. Quality of regulated power supply depend on load regulation, line regulation and output resistance. Load regulation and any regulated power supply must be less than 1%. Line regulation of any regulated power supply must be less than 0.1%. DC regulated power supply 0 to 30 volt 2 ampere. Specification of DC regulated power supply: input voltage 230 volt 50 Hz AC, output voltage 0 to 30 volt DC, output current 0 to 2 ampere, load regulation 0.05% from no load to full load, line regulation 0.01%, ripples less than 1 millivolt, protection short circuit and overload. The diagram of regulated DC power supply is shown below. Dual power supply. Dual power supply is used for operational amplifier circuit. It gives same positive and negative voltage at the output. The diagram of dual power supply is given in below diagram. The specification of dual power supply: IC 4195 output is equal to plus minus 15 volt, output current 100 milliampere, line regulation 1%, load regulation 0.06. DC regulated dual DC regulated power supply 0 to plus minus 15 volt. Specification of dual DC regulated power supply. The diagram is shown below. The specification of DC regulated power supply. Specification: input voltage 220 volt to 240 volt AC, input frequency 50 Hz, output voltage 0 to plus 15 volt and 0 to minus 15 volt DC, output current 1 ampere, fixed plus 5 volt regulated power supply. Specification of plus 5 volt regulated power supply. The diagram is shown below. Input voltage 220 volt to 240 volt AC, input frequency 50 Hz, output voltage plus 5 volt DC, output current 1 ampere. Another power supply, 0 to 12 volt AC DC power supply. Specification of 12 volt AC DC power supply. Input voltage 220 volt to 240 volt AC, input frequency 50 Hz, output voltage 0 to 12 volt DC and 0 to 12 volt AC, output current 1 ampere. The diagram is shown below. AC sources. First, alternator. An alternator is a machine which is used for producing alternating current by rotating the shaft of an alternator. A sinusoidal alternating voltage is generated across its terminal. Thus, mechanical energy is converted into electrical energy. Alternators are used in electric power supply, in electric power station. Thus, the mechanical energy is converted into electrical energy. Alternators are used in electric power station. Signal generator. An oscillator is the main part of signal generator. An oscillator is the main part of signal generator. A signal generator produces AC signal at its output. The voltage and frequency of an AC signal can be varied along with sine wave. Some signal generator can provide square wave, triangular wave, sawtooth wave, and rectangular pulse waveforms also. These signals can be used to test the working of different electronic circuit. There are two types of signal generator: AF signal generator and RF signal generator. AF signal generator. The signal generator which covers the entire audio frequency range is called audio frequency AF signal generator. The diagram of AF signal generator is given below. The specification of AF signal generator. Frequency range is 1 Hz to 100 kHz or 1 MHz. Signal amplitude is 0 volt to 30 volt. Duty cycle is 30% to 60%. Function signals is equal to sine and square wave. Output is equal to 2, one for sine wave signal and another for square wave signal. Function generator. Function generator provides a variety of output waveforms over a wide range. The most common output waveforms are sine wave, square wave, triangular wave, ramp, and pulse. The diagram of function generator is given below. The specifications of function generator is frequency range is 0.01 Hz to 1 megahertz. Frequency dial is equal to change the frequency from zero point 0.1 to 1.1. Functions used to select outputs such as sine, triangular or square wave. Amplitude to change the amplitude of the signal. Last, the conclusion of this article is various types of AC and DC voltage sources such as DC regulated power supply, dual power supply, 0 to 12 volt AC-DC power supply, alternator, signal generator and function generator have been studied in this experiment. There is some assignment for you. Please note it down in your copy. These questions are important examination point of view, so please note it down. The first question is, what is AF signal generator? Define primary and secondary cell. What is the difference between primary and secondary cell? What is the use of function generator in laboratory? What is the difference between DC regulated power supply and dual power supply? Enlist the various AC voltage source used in laboratory. Enlist the various DC voltage sources used in laboratory. Okay, thank you student. Meet you in next period. Thanks.